We're now going to have a presentation from our keynote speaker. I'm indeed honored this afternoon to introduce Assistant Secretary Dr. Kerri-Ann Jones. Dr. Jones was sworn in as Assistant Secretary of State for Oceans and International Environmental and Scientific Affairs on August 20th, 2009. Dr. Jones joins the leadership of the U.S. Department of State after serving as an independent consultant specializing in strategic planning and the development of research and education portfolios. Her most recent position in federal government was as director of the National Science Foundation's Office of International Science and Engineering. Her prior professional experience includes serving as the director for the experimental program to stimulate competitive research for the state of Maine, and as an associate director for the National Security and International Affairs at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. She has also worked in management and technical positions with the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, and the National Institutes of Health. Dr. Jones obtained her PhD from the Department of Molecular Biophysics and Biochemistry at Yale University, where she studied the effects of stress on protein expression and metabolism using nuclear magnetic resonance. That sounds scary, Dr. Jones. I'm not sure. Before her graduate study, she worked as an assistant for research at the Rockefeller University in immunology and development biology. She holds a bachelor's degree in chemistry from Barnard College at Columbia University. Assistant Secretary Jones, it is with great appreciation and gratitude that we invite you to the podium. It should be known that she was scheduled to come in last night, but unfortunately, because of a flight cancellation, spent the evening in Miami, and she literally just got off a plane about 30 minutes ago. So we're very, very fortunate to have her. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Russ, for that introduction, and I am very pleased to be here today at the third International Emerging Technology Symposium, hosted by the International Association of Plumbing and Mechanical Officials, IAPMO, which I think is a wonderful acronym, and also the World Plumbing Council. I also have to say, on a personal note, I was committed to be here because my father was a machinist, and he worked for the water department in our local town, and so I grew up looking at water meters. Today and tomorrow, we have come together to really explore solutions and emerging technologies in water efficiency, plumbing, and mechanical industries. And most of the organizations here today are working on these issues both domestically and internationally, and you've been doing it for a long time. And we know that you protect the health and ensure that our water is safe to drink. And I really am reminded of that when I travel, because I see how fortunate we are in the United States to be able to turn on a tap and even go to a public drinking fountain in a park and drink right from that tap. Your work as plumbers and city and municipal water managers, code officials, manufacturers, and engineers makes all of this possible. So I would like to first say thank you. Now, in many countries, you probably know that people cannot drink from the tap, and millions of people have no access to tap, to running water. They may have to walk miles to get water, and the water they get may not even be close to the water that we are used to. Both at home and abroad, we are seeing that water security is becoming one of the great challenges of our time. The statistics are shocking. Today, nearly 800 million people lack access to improved drinking water, a drinking water source. And what that means is one that is protected from animals and debris, such as a well or a community tap. And it's likely that 2 to 3 times that many people lack access to water that is considered safe to drink. More than 2.5 billion people lack access to basic sanitation. In India, the latest census tells us that more people have access to mobile phones than they do to toilets. Now, taken together, the lack of access to safe drinking water, basic sanitation, and poor hygiene practices pose one of our greatest health risks worldwide. Each day, nearly 6,000 people, mostly children under the age of 5, die from preventable diarrheal diseases. And of course, we know that women and children are disproportionately impacted. In some regions of the world, women and girls spend an average of 3 hours a day to collect water for their families' needs. And what this often means is they have to walk through isolated areas going further and further away from the safety of their family, and it puts them at risk. We also know that girls are likely to stop attending school when appropriate sanitation facilities are not available. Water is also, beyond its connection to health, it's a critical element in our food and energy security, and also in the environment, and also looking at how we will be affected by climate change. More than 70% of the water used around the world goes towards agriculture. In some developing countries, agricultural consumption can be as high as 90 to 95%. As populations continue to grow and countries develop, we also know that the demand for water will increase because of the increased grain production that'll be needed, but also because of dietary changes. As people shift to diets that are sort of more meat-focused, there'll be more water input required. They'll shift towards water consumption as they try to get the productive agriculture that they need. And we also know that the water quality on the coasts and rivers and in streams is also important for worldwide food production because fish, which is a significant source of protein, represents the protein needed for about 2.5 billion people in developing countries. Another sector we know that water touches on is energy. And I'm sure you've discussed that in the course of some of your earlier discussions today. We know that water is needed for most kind of energy productions. We know that water can produce energy, and we harness a lot of it through hydropower, but we also know that as we see countries increasingly interested in biofuels, water is needed to irrigate the crops that become the biofuels. In addition, we know that just moving water around, when there are water shortages, water is heavy, and moving it around requires a lot of energy to transport it from areas that have it to areas that need it. And we have also, in the course of the last several years, taken a very serious look at the role water plays in peace and security. There are more than 260 river basins that are shared by 2 or more countries around the world. Basins such as the Mekong in Southeast Asia, the Nile in the Mideast, and we have an example in our own backyard, the Rio Grande. As the need for water increases, competition over scarce water resources is likely to rise. Some of you may have seen the recent intelligence community assessment on global water security. That assessment was requested by Secretary Clinton to get a better sense of how international water issues would impact U.S. security interests. Now, while the report suggests that state-on-state conflict over water is unlikely in the next 10 years, it demonstrates that water issues will play an increasing role in peace and security of many regions that we care about. And many of these challenges are likely to intensify as the water becomes more scarce. By 2025, experts predict that nearly 2/3 of the world's population will live under water-stressed conditions. Climate change will also have profound impacts. Now, we anticipate that these conditions will vary depending on regions. Wet regions may become wetter and dry regions drier. Glaciers, which help store water in many regions of the world, are expected to continue to recede, and sea levels will rise. Changing patterns in rainfall are projected to increase the number and the severity of both floods and droughts. Now, all of these things will be dramatic in terms of the hazards they can affect, but also in their impact on health and agriculture, as I already mentioned in the beginning, because of the relationship water plays with these two issues. Now, that's sort of where the situation is, and it sounds somewhat dire, but I think it's challenging, and I think we all know that there are solutions that we need to work on together. In most places right now, there is enough water to meet needs. With the right management measures, sufficient safe water can be provided to the people who need it. We have seen many countries doing more with less, including the United States. And I know organizations such as yours are showing the way and leading the way with new technologies and approaches that use less water, less energy, and increase water reuse. We really need to be smarter about how we use water, smarter about how we manage ecosystems like wetlands, and how we manage man-made infrastructure like canals. To ensure sustainable water supplies and to better manage extreme hydrological events, we have to become smarter and better prepared. Now, 2 years ago, on World Water Day, Secretary Clinton announced 5 steps that the United States would take to advance water security, and I'd like to go through those briefly with you. The first step is to build political will. Perhaps the greatest impediment we face is that governments themselves are not committed, and I think we all know that this is a challenging area. We are working with donor countries and international organizations to raise awareness and to encourage developing countries to prioritize water and sanitation in national plans and budgets. We are working for them to integrate water into their global food security, health, and climate change initiatives. We have seen a number of cases where a country has turned itself around and made significant progress in meeting water needs and in advancing the sanitation needs of its people. Allow me to give you some examples of how we work on this tough issue of building political will among our colleagues around the world. Last month, we worked with a number of international partners to host a meeting of finance ministers on the margin of the World Bank IMF meetings here in Washington. For many countries, it was the first time their finance ministers participated in a meeting on water. It was a great opportunity for us to speak on the economic consequences of ignoring water and sanitation challenges. When you explain to finance ministers that these challenges could cost 5 to 10% of a country's GDP, you get their attention. And it begins to be an issue that is broader than just a sectoral issue, but more of an economic issue. Another example of how we're trying to build the political will is the very assessment I mentioned to you, the intelligence community assessment on global water security. Having a consensus view and a coherent document from the intelligence community that looks at water in a holistic way, as was the case for this assessment, can do a lot to motivate action and to bring attention. The second step of the plan that the Secretary announced is to build and strengthen institutional and human capacity at the local, national, and regional levels. While countries and communities must take the lead in securing their own water future, we are helping to build capacity to understand and respond to these challenges. The U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, and the Millennium Challenge Corporation are working to reduce water-related disease, increase agricultural productivity with reduced water consumption, and to build resiliency to climate change. The U.S. also works with governments to improve national and regional management of water. And the State Department has been working to support cooperation on shared waters throughout Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. Last year, Secretary Clinton and World Bank President Robert Zoellick signed a Memorandum of Understanding on World Water Day. The goal is to expand joint efforts to create a more water-secure future for the world. This partnership should greatly enhance our collective and individual capacities to address global water and sanitation challenges. What we're trying to do is to reinforce ongoing areas of cooperation and open up new avenues that will make assistance more effective through the collaboration across U.S. government agencies. The third step is to mobilize financial support, because the reality is that finance is important in solving some of these problems we've been talking about. Designing and building and maintaining and operating the infrastructure is expensive. Even if all of the world's international development funding was directed towards water and sanitation, it would still not be enough to meet developing country needs. In many cases, there is significant capital within developing countries to fund water projects. We need to get these funds working by strengthening local capital markets, providing credit enhancements, and creating pooled or revolving funds that support investments in water, sanitation, equipment, and wastewater management. This, as you can see, ties back to that first step about political will and tying in the financial interests in the country as well as sectoral issues that are sometimes more isolated. The fourth step is to use science and technology to identify innovative solutions. While there is no one single technological solution out there, scientific research and innovation do make a huge impact. Improving the way we manage water resources, creating better tools to purify water and bring it to the people who need it is really something that science and technology can offer. What we need to do is to provide incentives so that the development of technologies are out there that can make a difference at scale, and we also need to be able to share U.S. expertise, technical expertise, and knowledge with the rest of the world. IAPMO's domestic and international engagement is doing just this kind of work. I have been looking into it, and I have heard recently, and again just recently as I was coming in, that India has adopted your Uniform Plumbing Code and that you are active in the APEC Steering Committee to standardize energy and building codes. Setting and implementing standards and codes is really critically important. And I'd just like to mention two examples of how we see how our work is engaged in that area. Now, while we recognize for long-term solutions, we must advocate household water treatment and safe water storage as a means of immediately reducing the burden of water-related diseases, we also know there is a very confusing array of technologies out there. Everything from simply boiling to chlorination, sand filtration, and solar disinfection. A key challenge is really finding the right technology to fit the right location, the right community, the right region, and the right problem. Several years ago, the State Department, along with some other U.S. agencies, including the Environmental Protection Agency, began working with the World Health Organization and experts from within the government and from NGOs across the country. We were working to develop health-based performance specifications and testing guidelines for household water treatment technologies. The goal was to provide a source for consumers, governments, and donors to identify what approaches work best on a region-by-region basis, and to strengthen the capacity of communities to evaluate their own water treatment technologies. The WHO guidelines that address these issues were published last year and are helping to scale up these approaches across the world. Standards can also promote good management practices, as you are well aware of. We have worked closely with WHO to help countries implement a standardized method to protect the quality of drinking water. Called water safety plans, they are a methodology developed by WHO to conduct health-based vulnerability analysis of the entire water supply system, from the catchment area to the consumer. The goal is to provide a robust framework for evaluating and deciding which investments would yield the greatest health benefits. In other words, could we get people to think about how investments in improved watershed management, pipe repair and maintenance, and wastewater treatment would reduce water-related illnesses? A lot of these things all sound pretty straightforward, but I'm sure you're well aware when you're out there working on these, not all these pieces come together. These approaches are really helping to reshape how communities and governments address water challenges. The fifth step identified by the Secretary was to build and sustain partnerships. We cannot solve this problem on our own. meaning the US government or industry alone or NGOs alone. There is a great deal of knowledge and experience that lies with your organizations within the private sector, with US-based nonprofits, and with many of the US technical agencies. We need stronger partnerships with the non-governmental community and a whole-of-government approach. Last month, on World Water Day, Secretary Clinton launched the U.S. Water Partnership. The partnership is a joint venture between U.S. government agencies, the private sector, and nonprofit institutions to mobilize U.S. knowledge, resources, and expertise to improve water security, particularly in developing countries. The idea is to mobilize the best and the brightest from the United States, which have something to offer and who want to work internationally. The purpose of the partnership is to bring these resources together and to reduce the transaction costs for those in the U.S. As Secretary Clinton said at the launch, this partnership is about, quote, being innovative and creative, using the new tools that we're announcing today to bring people together in our own country, across our own government, and all the constituencies that care about water. The partnership is just getting underway, and we are very excited about the opportunities it opens up. For organizations like yours, we hope it will provide a means for connecting the international community with standards, best practices, and lessons learned that you've developed, both here in the United States and internationally. It will provide a platform for you to engage and partner with others to work on integrated solutions. It will help you and all of us to better understand the international water and sanitation challenges. The partnership can help to identify ways of providing direct support to countries and communities. Sharing knowledge and expertise will build support for U.S. approaches and technologies. We hope that your organizations think seriously about joining the partnership and partnering with us in this important effort. But also, we are working on these messages at home in our own practices at the State Department. As you know, we have many embassies around the world and many facilities around the world. Through the State Department's own Greening Diplomacy initiative, we are reducing our environmental footprint, conserving water, and cutting costs. The State Department is committed to reducing its potable water use in its buildings 20% by 2020, and to cutting outdoor use of potable water in half. By conserving water at our overseas facilities, we are reducing demand on the public water systems and local groundwater. We want to set an example of positive water resource practices by increasing water reuse on-site and protecting water quality. We see great potential in green buildings and emerging technologies globally and in our embassies. Embassies in Nairobi, Karachi, and Ouagadougou have constructed wetlands or wet gardens that use biofiltration to clarify treated wastewater for reuse in irrigation or safer discharge into the community. Our embassies are also working through the League of Green Embassies, a global network of 80 diplomatic missions from Armenia to Zimbabwe that works to improve energy efficiency, use renewable energy, and conserve water. Your organization may consider working with us. Green buildings need green plumbers, and your Green Plumber training program is really training the next generation of plumbers for this growing industry. Secretary Clinton had a wonderful line about water in her 2010 World Water Day speech. She said, and I quote, "It's not every day you find an issue where effective diplomacy and development will allow you to save millions of lives, feed the hungry, empower women, advance our national security interests, protect the environment, and demonstrate to billions of people that the United States cares about you and your welfare. Water is that issue." Thank you very much.
Everything that we discussed this morning that we'll continue to discuss, and maybe we're going to you have to leave? A couple of questions. Sure, I can try, yeah. Dr. Jones has a few minutes before she has to depart, so is there any questions from anyone in the audience? Yeah, Maria, microphone, please.
Dr. Jones, if we want to participate in the programs you mentioned, how do we do it? Who do we contact?
Okay, you can, first of all, you can contact the water coordinator in my bureau, who is Aaron Salzberg, and he can put you in contact with all the different points on this array of things I mentioned.
And what department is, how do we get to him?
Okay, his email, which I'm sure he'll appreciate me doing this, I think is Salzberg, which is SALZBERGA @state.gov. And what we'll make sure is we'll make sure we send that to Russ if I've misspoken on that. But that's the easiest thing. He has a team, and that team is connected to the Green Embassies programs, it's connected to the Global Water Partnership, it's working with the intelligence community, and so that's the best point of contact right now.
My name is Bill Erickson from C.J. Erickson Plumbing Company in Chicago. I just heard a presentation by General Cartwright, who described, in a defense speech, described an area of the planet where there is big concern, and that is within so many degrees north or south of the equator, where X amount of people in the age group of 21 years old lives, and then north of that it's a, so could you comment on that area being a focus of the State Department as far as water issues or water security issues go?
Well, I think what we're seeing is that there's a region all over the world in the developing countries. The overall age of the population is much younger than in the developed world, and the populations are growing fast, and so there's a lot of pressure on those areas. There's also the issue of economic growth, which in many areas is slow, and so you have a lot of unemployment. And the combination of unemployment and a lot of youth who may be unhappy and not see a lot of good things in their future, I think it tends to be a stressed area. Add to that, you know, a situation where you have a dearth of natural resources. You may have poor soils in some of the areas around the equator. You have really subsistence agriculture, so it's difficult. And you have water challenges. And the combination of those things are often viewed as real stressors that can raise security problems. In the National Intelligence Assessment, there is now an unclassified version of that, and we can give you that website. And it really talks about these different spots around the world where you have a high population concentration, you have rivers that are crossing boundaries, and you also have a dearth of power. And so often there are discussions about where should the dams be built, and how are the upstream or the downstream countries affected in terms of their agricultural productivity, while the country who has the dam is getting more, you know, hydroelectric power. So I think, you know, the issue regarding sort of foreign policy and national security is looking at water very broadly, as it is another one of those elements that can be strained when you have a lot of other conditions there that are already testing a system. So I think it's important that the State Department and across the U.S. government, we have focused on water now as a water security issue, not just a national security issue, but meaning individuals need to have water, but it also rolls into national security issues.
Anybody else? It's a great opportunity.
Shy? No, I don't think so. Well, we do hope you join the partnership, and we'll make sure that we have the websites that I mentioned about the assessment, the unclassified version, and we'll get the contact information.
Great, we got one more question.
Oh, okay.
I guess just what are we doing in terms of coordination on some of the international perspectives on, not just on the diplomatic side, but also support for private companies that are looking to export? You mentioned that as something that, you know, that we need to export U.S. technologies, and of course the Australians have recently done a lot of work of coming to this country, and other countries showing their technologies. What support is there along those lines and consistency with the diplomatic issues?
Well, the U.S. Water Partnership that I mentioned is trying to both coordinate across the U.S. government because there are so many technical agencies involved, but it also is trying to look at a way to showcase U.S. technologies and to make it easy to understand how you access U.S. technology. And so we see that as part of the role of the U.S. Water Partnership, to promote kind of the know-how that we've been able to develop and the best practices. There are also specific programs through the Department of Commerce, which are very focused on export. And Commerce is playing a role with us in this water partnership. So we're trying to bring across, we're trying to sort of unify in this partnership all of the elements that the U.S. has to bring to bear on this problem in a way that really addresses developing country needs, specifically developing country needs, but also showcases what we can do and make it easier. Sometimes we hear it's difficult for countries to understand how to access U.S. technology. And some countries have done a lot more to promote in ways, and I think we are trying to do that now as well. And so we see that as part of the role of this partnership. Yes.
It's not really a question, but more of a shameless plug.
Good.
But yesterday we had a tremendous meeting of leaders of the various associations that impact or involved with plumbing.
Yes.
And I just see a significant potential of that group helping in your efforts and the Secretary's efforts. So
Absolutely.
I just wanted you to know that we just had our inaugural meeting and we're available.
Okay.
So.
Well, we'll make sure we get you the contact information because you know, getting the sort of fundamental technology right and understanding what's needed in a specific setting is something I think that, you know, your organization has worked at for years, and so you have a lot to offer. And I think we all of us in the U.S. need to do a better job to sort of explain that and make it easier to access who we are and what we're about. And so one of the things that Secretary Clinton has done at the State Department is develop this office called the Global Partnership Initiative, which is really about working with the private sector to do sort of creative things that maybe make the government a little less cumbersome, because sometimes, you know, we get a little bureaucratic. You might not know that, but we do. So these partnerships are trying to be a little more agile for both the private sector in the U.S. to want to work more with the U.S. government, but for both of us together to really be showcasing what we can do. One more. I think this will have to be the last one, if that's okay.
Sure.
Thanks.
Yeah. This is going to be the last question.
My name is Greg Chick. I'm a plumbing contractor. The plumber being the steward of water as a resource, is there any efforts available for the federal government to assist the education of the plumber becoming a better steward of that resource? The plumbers, if I may just be honest, need a little bit of help looking better and doing better with this new emerging situation.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a good point. I think, you know, we've looked into your green plumbing sort of training, and I think that's a very good model, but I do think your point's a good one. Now, that's not something the State Department would do, because we'd get in trouble if we did that. But I think, you know, I think it is something where we could certainly talk to some of the technical agencies about that. I mean, to me, that would be sort of a partnership between, you know, EPA and NIST and Commerce. So you have both the commercial piece and then you have the technical piece, NIST, which was really interested in standards and measurement and testing and everything. And then you have EPA, which really has a lot of the water controls and the water purification standards and whatnot. So I think there's something. I'll talk to my colleagues at EPA and mention that. But thank you very much, and I apologize for being a few minutes late.